So the question you probably have, a lot of our clients ask us at the very beginning of their engagements with us is, do you buy an investment property through your own name or through another entity such as a family trust? And this question is often asked in the context of building very large property portfolios. There are other reasons why you might use one entity or the other, but in the context of really scaling and building a large property portfolio, I hope to answer this question or give some clarity to those listening on how they might answer this question for themselves in the future. So firstly, what is a trust? You've probably heard about this, you read about it, it's all over the internet. How are these people building large property portfolios with the trust, but whenever I go to the bank, I can only get a $500,000 loan. What exactly is going on here? So to start off, let's go through what is a trust in very basic terms. It is a separate legal entity that is allowed to own an asset and generate an income from that asset and distribute that income to whoever is a part of that trust. So in most cases, people set up a discretionary family trust where, you might go set that up and you could be the controlled and you can be the trustee of that trust and control the asset and how that trust operates. And your family can be the beneficiaries of that trust, where if it makes $1 of income or $1 of profit, it can then distribute that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 family members or whoever is named in that trust. So it really is a way to hold assets and to distribute income at the end of the financial year to whoever, the trust nominates should, need that income that year. So in the context of building large property portfolios, we sometimes do recommend to clients working with their accountants and mortgage brokers on going through the avenue of a family trust, purely from the reasoning of, having the goal of building a large property portfolio. So a lot of clients come to us, they have very high ambitions, and of course they should have, because it's all about, building that long-term wealth and that long-term growth. But for most people, incomes will always constrain how big the property portfolio can be. So no matter who you are and what you do and how great you selected the asset, there will be a point in your journey where your own income of going out and generating an income from your work will come to a point where the banks just will not lend anymore. And typically, that amount is anywhere between 5 and 8 times your income, plus all of the rental incomes of the properties that you hold or may want to buy. And that's usually the upper limit of what you can buy in your personal name. But the really cool thing is you can start thinking about buying properties through a family trust. And because it is a separate legal entity, it goes through its own serviceability calculations at the bank. So for example, you might have $1 million worth of borrowing capacity in your own name, but you could put that deposit that you would buy in your own name and into a family trust and get another $1 million worth of borrowing capacity in the family trust. And why you might want to consider, putting the money in the family trust or buying properties through the family trust is that because it is considered a separate legal entity, the banks will go through the serviceability calculations completely separately. So you could have the $1 million worth of borrowing in the family trust, and as long as the rent that comes in pays off all of the interest, and all of the expenses and maybe leaves a couple of $1,000s worth of profit, the bank, with an accountant who signs off saying that this trust is a self-sufficient asset or a self-sufficient entity, they will sign off and say that this trust is completely self-sufficient. It doesn't form part of your personal serviceability calculations, whether it's got $1 million worth of debt and 2 properties or $5 million worth of debt and whatever so many properties behind it, the bank will go, we don't care. And again, not all banks, but there are some banks out there, so work with a good mortgage broker. They can help you find and structure those deals. But when you are finding banks and lending structures buy properties in a trust, it preserves a borrowing capacity in your personal name. So as an example, we're working with a client right now, very high income, north of $400,000 a year. They're in a job where, their incomes are going to grow. It's very possible that they might be making more than $1 million a year within the next 5 years. So for someone like that, where incomes are forecasted to continue to grow, buying in a trust is not so much of an important factor in the early stage of that journey, because they get the benefits of negative gearing by buying in their own name, and they can keep stacking that portfolio over time. And maybe when they come to their second, third, or fourth property, and especially if it is a larger property like a commercial property, they could consider buying in a trust. But we're also working with clients who have relatively average incomes, where they might only see a 2 or 3% increase in their incomes, and it might taper off at $150,000 or $200,000 a year as an overall upper limit for their career. And for clients like that, where their ambitions are still there to keep building a very large property portfolio, it's more important to start thinking about, how do I increase my borrowing capacity by buying in a trust, where I might start buying it today. It may have, a negative cash flow today, where I may not get the tax deductions for it, but within 3, 4, 5 years, the interest rates might stabilize, come down, the rents will definitely go up, and at that point, the trust will be self-sufficient. So then I can preserve the borrowing capacity in my personal name and potentially buy another property through a trust or through my own serviceability without necessarily being capped out. So in our view, if you have an income profile where you might see it taper off or level off, and not hitting the numbers that match the ambitions of the portfolio that you want to build, you might want to start considering buying properties in a trust in the early stages, so that you can maximize the amount of properties that you can own. So another thing about this, it doesn't mean you're going to have unlimited borrowing capacity. Typically, if you structure it correctly, you might be able to squeeze out the extra 1 or 2 properties at that $400,000 to $600,000 mark by going through a trust versus going through your personal name over your portfolio buying journey. And that might seem like a little bit for some people, but compounded over 10, 15, 20 years, having that extra $500,000 or $1 million worth of exposure to Australian property really compounds over the longer term. And that's sort of really when the benefits of buying in a trust really outweigh the benefits of tax deductions of buying in your own name and limiting your borrowing capacity that way. And this is something that came through personal experience. I started my property journey completely buying properties in my own name, didn't get advice, didn't talk to an accountant, didn't talk to a mortgage broker, went straight to the bank, got a loan, and started buying properties. And very quickly, it got to the point where my borrowing capacity was capped. I had a good property portfolio, but my ambitions were just much higher. And it came to a point where, you start unraveling that position, restructuring, selling down assets, and then going at it again through the right structures to expand your borrowing capacity. So if you are looking for assistance and want to have a chat about buying a property through a trust or buying in your own name, feel free to reach out to us or drop a comment below. We'll be happy to answer your questions.